The year is 1966. Deep in the Vietnamese jungle, something is about to change modern warfare forever. Not a missile, not a tank, not even a gun, but a trap, designed by a simple farmer who never spent a single day in military training. Military historians would later call it the most psychologically devastating defensive weapon of the Vietnam War. The Pentagon spent millions trying to counter it. Soldiers feared it more than enemy fire. And it all started with one man, one night, and a desperate need to protect his home. This is the story behind the legendary Vietnamese Punji trap, and how Nguyen Van Thinh's single innovation changed jungle warfare forever. No one expected it. No one was prepared. And once you hear this story, you'll understand why. Nguyen Van Thinh was not a soldier. He was a rice farmer in the Mekong Delta, a man whose hands knew soil better than steel, whose eyes could read the seasons in the way morning mist settled over the paddies. Born in 1932, Thinh learned the old ways from his grandfather, a hunter who knew every secret the jungle held: how to read animal tracks in mud, how to set snares that caught wild boar, how to craft traps from bamboo and vine that could hold anything that walked on four legs. But in 1965, everything changed. The Americans came, not as visitors, but as an army sweeping through the countryside, searching for Viet Cong fighters. Thinh's village, a cluster of 30 families living as they had for generations, suddenly found itself in the middle of a war zone. The night that changed everything came in April 1966. Thinh stood at the edge of his village with the other men, watching distant fires burn in the neighbouring hamlet. Letty Mai, his wife of 12 years, stood beside him, her face illuminated by the orange glow on the horizon. "They'll come here next," she whispered. Thinh knew she was right. The village had no weapons, no soldiers, just farmers, fishermen, and their families. Captain Tran from the North Vietnamese army had visited once, asking them to hide supplies, to provide intelligence. But protection? That was something they would have to provide themselves. That night, Thinh couldn't sleep. He walked through his rice paddies, remembering his grandfather's words. "The jungle provides everything you need. You just have to know how to ask." And then it hit him. A memory from childhood, setting traps for wild boar with his grandfather. The principle was simple. Use the animal's own weight and movement against it. Create something that waits patiently, invisibly, and strikes with certainty when triggered. But Thinh's innovation went further, much further. What made Thinh's trap different wasn't just its design. It was his understanding of psychology, terrain, and human behavior. Traditional Punji traps had been used in Southeast Asia for centuries. Simple sharpened stakes hidden in pits, effective against animals, occasionally against humans. But Thinh saw their limitations. They were too obvious, too easy to spot, and once discovered, easily avoided. So he made 5 critical innovations that military analysts would later study in classified Pentagon briefings. First, the camouflage technique. Thinh didn't just cover his traps with leaves. He studied how soldiers moved through the jungle, which paths they chose, where they placed their feet when tired, where they would step when startled or running. He placed traps not in obvious paths, but in the exact places soldiers would move when trying to avoid obvious paths. The trap didn't wait for careless soldiers, it waited for careful ones. Second, the psychological amplifier. Here's where Thinh's genius truly showed. He didn't just sharpen bamboo stakes, he hardened them in fire until they were strong as steel, then deliberately shaped them to create maximum psychological impact. Some angled upward, some angled sideways, some curved inward, making withdrawal agonizing. Every trap was designed not just to injure, but to horrify. Third, the infection factor. This is the detail that makes modern readers uncomfortable, but it's historically documented. Thinh recognized that an injured soldier was more valuable than a dead one. An injured soldier required 2 more soldiers to carry him, tied up medical resources, destroyed morale, and spread fear through first-hand testimony. So he began treating the bamboo stakes with organic materials that dramatically increased infection rates. Fourth, the placement pattern. Thinh never placed a trap alone. He created networks. If you avoided one, you stepped into another. If you spotted one and warned your squad, they scattered into others. He turned the jungle floor into a 3-dimensional chess game where every move had consequences. Fifth, the adaptation principle. This was perhaps most important. Thinh constantly evolved his designs based on what worked. When soldiers began using long poles to probe ahead, he created side trigger mechanisms. When they started wearing thicker boots, he made longer stakes. When they began jumping over suspicious ground, he created landing zone traps. The trap learned, it adapted, it evolved. Within 3 months, Thinh had created 17 different trap variations. He taught other villagers. The knowledge spread through the resistance network like wildfire, and then the Americans encountered them in force. Colonel James Mitchell had served in Korea. He'd trained at West Point. He'd studied military history and tactics for 20 years. None of it prepared him for what he encountered in the Vietnamese jungle. His battalion's first major sweep through Thinh's region happened in August 1966. In the classified after-action report, declassified only in 2008, Mitchell wrote, "We lost more men to booby traps in 3 days than to enemy fire in 3 months." But the casualties weren't the worst part. It was watching my soldiers' eyes. Watching them realize that every single step could be their last. Watching men who'd faced machine gun fire without flinching become paralyzed with fear at the sight of ordinary jungle floor. The statistics were devastating. In some regions, booby traps and mines accounted for 70% of American casualties. Medevac helicopters called it spike duty, retrieving soldiers with massive penetrating wounds, often infected, always agonizing. But the tactical impact went even deeper. Military movement slowed to a crawl. Units that previously covered 5 kilometers per hour now crawled at half a kilometer per hour. Soldiers developed what combat psychologists called trap paralysis, an inability to move forward even when ordered. Some units refused to enter certain areas entirely. The Pentagon responded with everything they had. They developed special boots with steel insoles. Soldiers began carrying long poles and metal detectors. They created specialized tunnel rat and trap detection units. They even experimented with trained dogs to sniff out traps. But Thinh and villagers like him across Vietnam adapted faster than the military could respond. New trap designs appeared weekly. Each countermeasure spawned 3 new trap variations. The war was changing, not through major battles or strategic bombing campaigns, but through thousands of tiny, invisible threats that turned the jungle itself into an enemy. Back in his village, Thinh had become a quiet legend. Captain Tran visited regularly now, documenting his techniques. Leti Mai coordinated with other village women, creating intelligence networks that tracked American patrol patterns and helped optimize trap placement. But Thinh never celebrated. Each trap he built represented the desperate reality of his situation. A farmer forced to become a warrior using the only weapons the jungle provided. The Punji trap's impact extended far beyond Vietnam. It fundamentally changed how modern militaries think about asymmetric warfare, insurgent tactics, and the nature of defensive weapons. After the Vietnam War, military academies worldwide began teaching the Thinh doctrine, though they rarely used his name. The principles he demonstrated became foundational to understanding guerrilla warfare. Lesson 1. defensive psychology. The most effective weapons aren't always the most lethal. They're the ones that occupy the enemy's mind, that force them to slow down, second guess, and fear every step forward. Lesson 2. Adaptive innovation. In asymmetric conflict, the side that learns and adapts fastest has the advantage, regardless of technological superiority. Lesson 3. Environmental integration. The best weapons are often the ones the environment provides freely, requiring no supply chains, no manufacturing, no logistics, just knowledge and creativity. Lesson 4. Cumulative effect. Small tactical victories. A soldier wounded here, a patrol delayed there, accumulate into strategic advantages that can decide conflicts. These lessons influenced everything from IED tactics in Iraq and Afghanistan to modern drone warfare doctrine. Military strategists studying insurgent tactics always return to Vietnam, and specifically to the Punji trap phenomenon, as a case study in effective asymmetric resistance. But there's another legacy, one less often discussed. The trap's effectiveness created a psychological divide that never fully healed. American veterans returned home with memories not just of combat, but of an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, that struck without warning from the ground itself. Vietnamese veterans remembered the desperate innovation required to defend their homes against overwhelming military force. Both sides were shaped by what happened in those jungles. Both sides learned lessons they carry to this day. Nguyen Van Thinh survived the war. He returned to farming, rarely speaking about his wartime innovations. When Western journalists found him in the 1990s, hoping to interview the father of modern guerrilla trap warfare, he declined. "I was a farmer," he said simply. "I did what farmers do. I protected my land." He passed away in 2003 at age 71. His obituary in local Vietnamese newspapers mentioned his community service and his skill at growing rice. It never mentioned the trap, but military historians know, veterans know, and anyone who studies the Vietnam War seriously knows that this humble farmer's innovation changed warfare forever. Today, if you visit the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, you can see examples of Punji traps behind glass. They look simple, almost primitive. Tourists walk past them quickly, moving on to more dramatic exhibits, tanks, helicopters, photographs of major battles. But military officers from around the world stop and stare. They understand what those simple bamboo stakes represent. They see not just a weapon, but a philosophy. They approached a conflict that valued ingenuity over firepower, adaptation over force, and intimate knowledge of terrain over technological superiority. The Punji trap didn't win the Vietnam War. No single weapon ever does. But it changed the war's nature, slowed the American advance, and forced a superpower to respect the power of simple innovation, deployed with strategic brilliance. One farmer, one trap, one innovation that military strategists still study 50 years later. Nguyen Van Thinh never sought glory. He never claimed to have changed history. He simply did what countless others across Vietnam did, used whatever resources were available to defend what mattered most. Sometimes the smallest innovations create the biggest impacts. Sometimes a farmer knows more about winning wars than generals do. And sometimes, the most devastating weapon isn't the one with the most explosive power. It's the one no one expected. This is the story the history books minimize, the innovation that changed everything, the trap that made the jungle itself a warrior. This is the story of how one Vietnamese farmer changed warfare forever. And now you know the truth.